Hi everybody, I'm Joshua with Loot Everything, and I'm making this video to show you how I make silicone sprue style molds for a D20 die. I used my laser cutter to make this wooden rig that will hold everything in place. It's easy to snap together and take apart once the mold has been cured. It's reusable, unlike the Dixie cup method that I've been using for a long time. I think it's more efficient use of silicone than the Dixie cups that like to flare out really wide at the base. And it also has this really cool label built into the mold, which you'll see more towards the end of the video. The first part of my workflow is assembling the stand by sliding all of the side pieces onto the rings and then securing everything with a rubber band. Inside the wood rings, I put a piece of clear acetate that's been laser cut to fit the height of the rig and long enough to cover the entire diameter of the mold plus about a ½ inch of overlap. Then I insert an acrylic plate at the bottom that'll hold the sprue in the center. This plate is laser cut slightly smaller than the diameter of the mold, so it holds the acetate wall in place and creates a seal so the silicone won't slip out. Once the rig is assembled, I carefully put the master die inside. The master die that I've used is 3D printed with a hole already in one of the faces so that I have less surfaces to clean up once the die has been cast. Once that's set up, I put that aside and bust out the silicone. I've tried several different types of smooth-on brand silicone mixes, and this Sorta Clear is far and away my favorite for dice molds. It's got the right level of firmness, and having crystal clear molds makes a tremendous difference when you're casting dice. It's a 1-to-1 weight or volume ratio recipe, and it says the pot life is 25 minutes, meaning that's how long you'll have to get the silicone into the mold before it's too hard to work with. I personally aim for having everything finished within about 15 minutes or so. I use a digital scale to measure out 25 milliliters of each part and then pop those into a vacuum pot to degas. I leave them in the vacuum pot for about 5 minutes and then take them out to mix together. I like to start a timer on my phone when I start mixing so I can keep track of how much time I have before the silicone will harden. For this video, I degassed before I mixed the two parts together, and I usually degas once again once they've been mixed, but I was so caught up with making the video that I forgot to pop it in the vacuum pot that second time. I was a little worried that I'd have some bubbles in the mold, but it turned out just fine. And I've later learned that as long as you have a pressure pot, you don't really need to degas the silicone at all. Using a Ziploc bag like a pastry chef might ice a cake, I pipe the silicone into the mold, taking care that the die doesn't tip over and making sure that there aren't any big bubbles that get trapped on the bottom side of the die. If I do notice any bubbles, a toothpick usually takes care of those pretty quickly. Once the mold is full, I pop it into my pressure pot stand and use an air compressor to fill the pot with 40 psi of air. After the mold has had 4 hours to cure, I take it out of the pot and have a look. This is where I find having the wooden rig is really useful. Everything comes apart really easily and is just ready to go right after that for another cast. So here you can see where the 20 that was etched into the acrylic plate at the bottom of the base has left this label that makes it a lot easier to keep organized. Now, cutting the master die out of the mold is a skill that takes some practice. It took me about half a dozen tries or so before I felt like I had it down. I first use a sharpener to make sure that the blade is super sharp, and then start by cutting a ring around the sprue because a little bit of silicone usually slips in beneath it. I line up the edges of the surface that has the sprue in it and make 2 initial cuts in the mold, stopping just short of actually hitting the sprue or the dice. Then I pop the sprue out and start making the main cuts down opposite sides of the die. Once most of the cut has been made, I go back and slightly pull the mold away from the die to cut the rest of the way. And here you have a first look at what the mold looks like once the master has been removed. You can see that the silicone is very clear, which is great when you're trying to get all sorts of different complex designs inside of the mold itself. With the master die free of the mold, I trim up the edges and use a Sharpie to coat the number label. You can see how making the mirror image of the number on the acrylic plate flips it the right way on the mold itself. And that's how I make a sprue mold for a D20 die. I hope my method gave you a few ideas for how to make silicone molds, and if you spot any ways that I can improve this method, I'm all ears. You can stay in touch with me on social media. I'm Loot Everything pretty much everywhere. You can also join my email list at www.looteverything.com. Everyone on that list is the first to know when I launch a new product or share a new tutorial. So if dice making is a hobby that you're interested in, I'd love for you to be a part of my world. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.